Hello, this is Greg Allison with Galactic Greg's coming to you on the 31st of May, 2020. And today is another historic day. And this may have a little bit more significance that I'm going to explain shortly, because today at 9:16 Central Daylight Time, there was a self capture between Dragon 2, Demo 2, and the International Space Station. And at 9:28 Central Daylight Time, I'm going to use Central because that's where Houston operates out of, and me too, here in Alabama. There was the hard capture with ISS. Now, I misspoke yesterday in the video when I was talking about the capture with the space station remote manipulator system and it berthing it in. Turns out that the article I read on that was apparently an error. They had planned to do an autonomous docking. And in fact, I did know that was a fact that the Dragon 2 is capable of doing the actual docking with ISS autonomously, which the cargo version, the previous Dragon 1, could not do. Of course, that don't mean that's what you're going to do. As I mentioned, the soft dock, the berthing is easier on the systems hardware-wise than a hard dock, but the berthing operation requires operation of the mobile servicing system, which includes all the crew interfaces, all the electronics computers that go out to the mobile remote servicer, the SSRMS, and also we included in the MSS and is that robot I mentioned named Dexter, the special purpose Dexterless manipulator. All these things said, the SSRMS apparently was not used today. The Dragon 2 actually docked autonomously. Now the crew did have the override capability that I mentioned yesterday, but fortunately today Hal decided to let the crew come aboard. And indeed they did. So the crew of Dragon 2, Demo 2, crew of 2 entered the ISS at 12:22 Central Daylight Time on 2020, 31 May. That's a lot of twos. The crew, of course, was Robert Bentham and Douglas Hurley. And so Bob and Doug. So, in any event, I'm going to explain to you in a moment a lot about the significance of this. I mean, not just what happened today, but what it meant to have a space station, the role the International Space Station has actually played, and being a stepping stone to something much bigger. And I'm talking immediate steps and bigger steps even. So we're going to hit that in a minute, but let's just kind of go hit a few highlights first of what happened. So they went in, and there was, once they entered the crew, entered the International Space Station, they all lined up inside of Node 2. I failed to mention that. Node 2. Node 2 I was quite involved in myself. But they went inside of Node 2 and had their little greet ceremony, their welcoming ceremony, and they lined up. There was the American already on board and 2 Russian astronauts there. So Doug of the crew, Mr. Douglas Hurley, he appeared to be at first pretty hot. I guess he was doing a lot of work. He was wiping his brow quite a bit, getting set up, trying to get everything ready to get in there. Apparently it was a bit of work. But he said, when asked about by Ted Cruz was at Mission Control, and he asked him how it handled, and he said, it flew like it was supposed to, and that was good. He said, couldn't be happier with the performance of the vehicle. And Cruz further asked, what would you tell them that we could do together in this country, because he was alluding to all the stuff going on in the country right now, the riots and so forth. So he said, what would you tell people if we could work together? And of course, the crew was more immediately focused on, hey, what we did in terms of a great milestone of return to flight, which was very significant. But we work together, we can do far greater things. And I'm going to hit on that in a moment. Now, Bob came out with some surprising discussion, because I always expected that not having the solid rocket boosters, that the Dragon would have a smoother ride, and it probably did for the first couple of minutes. But he said the Dragon was huffing and puffing all the way up. He said, I could tell we were on a dragon. I think I paraphrased that last one, but he actually said the Dragon was huffing and puffing all the way up. So it was a rather dynamic ride. He said it was not as smooth as the space shuttle after it got rid of the solid rocket boosters. So that was a pretty interesting comment that he made. Pardon me. Jim Brendenstein said that he was going to push commercialization of space, pushing commercial providers to low Earth orbit. And he talked about how humans would be living long-term on the moon, living and working with the aim of getting to Mars. So that sounds like a big long-term goal and how this is playing. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit beyond that, talk about some bigger things here. So, yeah, so we're planning, the plans on NASA's books right now, and this is, most of the government agency, that's pretty bold for a government agency, is that we get the moon base operating as a base of operations so we can grow our deeper legs and head to Mars. Of course, Elon Musk is planning to go straight to Mars. But the NASA plan is to build a moon base and then head to Mars. And this is seen as a step in that direction. It can also be a step in the direction that Elon Musk wants to take us into with the spaceship that he's designed, a Starship, excuse me, as he calls it. And the Starship is, totally different vehicle, totally different technology, but a lot of the control systems and software, like autonomous docking, rendezvous and docking, performed by Dragon 2 here on the Demo 2 flight, Dragon 2, Demo 2, Dr. Node 2, Carrion 2, 1222. That is a lot of the same capabilities, and developing a lot of the same techniques, life support systems, control systems, a whole lot of the same kind of technology can indeed be used on Starship. Now, the structure, propulsion systems, well, the structure is definitely different. So we'll see how all that plays out. There's a lot of technology to be built if that can be done. And by the way, he does have a contract to, or at least he's one of the three players working to get crew landing on the moon. So what's happened here is this, and this is what's significant. Let me back up a little bit. A lot of us have big dreams. I mean, really large dreams for living and working in space. I'm not talking about just going to the moon and Mars. We're talking about having really large-scale space habitats. And this technically is doable with 1970s bridge building technology as outlined by Gerard K. O'Neill. This is a concept of what's called a Bernal sphere, a rotating sphere that has houses and trees and rivers and lakes inside, a closed-loop ecological life support system rotating to provide artificial gravity. Well, there were concepts for systems much larger than that, up to 2 miles in diameter, 4 miles in diameter, and 20 miles across. And if you looked at my previous video, you would have seen some images of that in the lead-in where I was playing music, or really the sounds of the electromagnetic fields, as Cassini flew by Enceladus. I believe that was a Cassini flight. It might have been Voyager, but I have to go back and double check that. But those are the space sounds. That's all NASA recording, so that can't be subject to, it's nature, so it's not going to be subject to copyright, fortunately. Now, that said, these grand plans like that, no government can afford to pay for anything close to or approaching that in any sort or fashion, nor is that their role. Some people think, well, government should just go out and build all this stuff. Well, they can't. It takes an economy to do something, to build a community, a real community, an economy to build a community, a home, a nation, cities. That requires business. It's got to be self-sustaining based on what you get there. You got to have something that you can sell, trade, or some economic impetus to do all that stuff. Now, what NASA is to getting space started, NASA is like the government in putting the railroad out there, the land grants. It's providing the money to get things started. It's like airmail help get the aviation industry started. Well, NASA can serve the same kind of role toward the development of space, and it can go far larger than cities on Mars. Now, it takes time for all these things to happen, of course, but these are the long-range goals. And it starts with something like the International Space Station. And why? Well, here's why. And I have a good example. It's many years ago, and when I was an advocate, and still am, in the Space Frontier Foundation. And back in the day, some umpteen years ago, the Space Frontier Foundation, being really totally pro-private space, it had the notion that, you know, we need to not have all these government programs. Let's shut them down and get the government to pump money straight into private enterprise. And, you know, that had its merits, but, you know, the political lay of the land at the time was that the big contractors and the states and the senators and the political pull weren't going to allow that to happen at that point in time. Philosophies have changed. They had political inertia, let's put it that way. So it's kind of hard to overcome that political inertia unless you give it a judo flip, which I can talk about that in the future. Somebody, NASA administrator, put a judo flip into the system when he ended the shuttle program. We'll talk about that in a future video. All that said, Mr. Mike, all that said, the value of the space station is this. I was asked at a meeting of the advocates. We had a meeting in one of our conference hotels when we were near LAX out in Los Angeles. And one of the members, a key leading advocate, David Anderman, who is a friend of mine and, you know, long-term associate through the Space Frontier Foundation, he put a question to the advocates there at that meeting, at the advocate meeting at a Space Frontier Foundation conference. He said this. He said, name me one, give me one valid reason why we should have the ISS. And nobody was crickets. I held my finger up and said, David, I've got one reason. There's one value of the ISS that will be that will really promote our industry. He looked at me kind of incensed, and just what could that be? I can understand, you know, the government is a bureaucratic type thing, you know, so anytime a government program is not going to be the most efficient way to get things done, because cost and innovation are not necessarily their top priority, and they tend to be conservative, not want to take a lot of chances. So, you know, I totally sympathized with where they were coming from with this. But I said, David, and I was an advocate, by the way, and I have done commercial space stuff myself, and including I had started my own little venture. Now, what David, my reply to David, let me put it back. My reply to David was this. I said, by virtue of being there, the International Space Station is going to create a huge logistical burden, and it will just be too expensive to continue to service on a regular basis with the Space Shuttle program. The Space Shuttle program is just too expensive. I said, at some point, NASA is going to be looking for other means to get crew and cargo to the International Space Station. And David backed off and, you know, and rightfully responded. He says, do you think there's any way in the world that NASA is going to allow anything other than their government-controlled space shuttle to enter any of the space around ISS? There's no way that they'll do that. At that time, there was a rule just like that. They would not have initially. And I said, David, eventually they're going to have to. They just can't afford not to. The ISS is a huge logistical project. It's going to take a lot to keep that thing going. And they're going to be forced in time to seek cheaper alternatives to maintain it. And that is going to spur the development of commercial launch industry and commercial crew. He wasn't buying it. Funny thing is, it wasn't, but you know, just a very few years after that, NASA opened its first commercial cargo offices and first commercial crew offices. And David, and along with another friend of mine, Ben Meninas, and I think another guy, started a company. They were looking to try to commercialize the Soyuz spacecraft, maybe some modifications to actually go to the American portion of the International Space Station, provide those services, if I recall correctly what their plan was. Now, I'm sure maybe David might chime in and correct me on that. I admire what they did. That was an amazing stroke, but I thought it was also funny and a good self-vindication of the point I made. The guy who was really questioning and grilled me on it was one of the first guys to jump on the opportunity. Unfortunately, their plan didn't pan out because this was a little bit longer range thing that took money, and having the investors on board that long for something like that was a tough thing to deal with, because in the private industry you need a rate on return and it needs to come fairly fast. That's the problem with the private industry. So that's why having the government to lure things along helps. Fortunately, SpaceX had started launching satellites, so they already had development going, and they were able to morph that into a space station cargo resupply and then a space station crew, which we just attained today, finally. So today is the culmination of that dream. It took many years in the making, but it has led to a commercially viable space access for human beings. So for today, we have finally reached that milestone, paid for by a government project to get government astronauts launched to ISS. But as I mentioned in my video yesterday about their launch, where I used the symbol of Doug, I believe it was, and his visor saying, hey, actually I believe it's Bob. It was Bob Behnken. So definitely Bob Behnken in that photograph. So I used the caption, Hal opened the ISS hatch door. Well, I didn't put ISS in there, but that's what I meant. Kind of like the 2001 Space Odyssey. Hal opened the pod bay door. I have a little fun. You got to. Now, all that said, like I said, SpaceX also is now free to use this system to supply crew and cargo to another potential space station project, a commercial space station to be built by Axiom Space. And I hope that they make it through and actually build this. It'll be interesting to see what they did. The other short-term purpose of this capsule could be to service space tourism for Space Adventures. I've been to Space Adventures headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia many years ago, because I was also looking at doing a little space adventure vehicle with my old company, High Altitude Research Corporation. We had a concept we had entered into the X Prize called the Liberator. I'm telling you, I was commercial space. I was new space, even before there was a word for new space. With my High Altitude Research Corporation. I'll go more into that in the future. So to see my future videos, we're going to cover a lot of topics. Make sure to bang the update subscribe first, and then bang the update notification bell and click all. Because I'm going to be doing more videos on this channel. I've had a hiatus because of all the things upon me, and I've had a rough couple months here. And I mentioned some of the other videos I was going to do in my previous video. I'm going to do a lessons learned vis-a-vis Apollo 13. I missed the opportunity to do the anniversary video, but I'm going to do actually lessons not learned. There is still a very systemic problem that we've not adequately addressed. So that's got to be dealt with. I'm going to talk about that. All that aside, so where can this really lead? Why is this really important? Now that we got commercial crew into space, that sets the precedence. And we see the market evolving. This is going to help SpaceX and other companies evolve their systems, whether it be the Starship, or whether it be New Glenn or a New Armstrong, or something entirely different, something else. We now have the precedent set. The market's there as long as ISS is there. If Axiom Space builds their space station, we have a requirement for logistics up there, and that is going to require servicing. Way back in I think it was 2006, 4, sometime back, there was a ISDC in Oklahoma, and we had what was called the Great Space Debate, and I was on the panel. I, Rick Tomlinson, and Bob Zubrin, and we're all supposed to debate each other. And surprisingly, Tomlinson and I were pretty much on the same side. And I described, and Thomas has used this since, but I described that long before he ever used it, the visions that NASA should be in charge, and government services should be to explore, like Lewis and Clark. But exploring requires you be in an ever expanded bubble, because you can't just keep exploring the same space. You're not exploring, you're surveying. And you can only survey so much, right? So it should be the government charge to lead an ever expanding bubble of exploration into space. not to have to focus on all the logistics and run a bus service all day long like we were doing with the space shuttle. So if you're doing this, and then if you're using private enterprise and their more creative, innovative means of servicing that bubble as it expands, then you've created a dynamic for developing space from the exploration and the development of the services required to support that bubble. And the bonus of that is you get other capabilities along the way, capabilities which could lead, indeed, to something like that, or better, or bolder. The key thing about space is that if you know chemistry, you can have a system with like different chemical components sitting at a low energy state. But if you could activate it and cause a chemical reaction, it could get it to a higher energy state, much higher energy state. But sometimes that what you need is called an energy of activation to kick it up there. Now, energy of activation is not equal to the difference, but it causes the systems, the chemicals in here to react in such a way that you will get like combustion, that energy of activation, like, you know, a can of gasoline and with air on top, the energy of activation might be the match. In that case, it's a low energy of activation. Well, so that way with space. In the space world, the resources in space are vast. To us puny humans, we could consider it infinite. The sun puts out vast amounts of energy. The asteroids are full of everything we could ever want in terms of metals, minerals, and then there's the moons of the planets. There's and on out to the Kuiper belt, the Oort cloud, and on out to the stars. Resources in space abound. They are vast, very vast. It's been said that us here, we're starving on Earth and shivering because we're running low on energy. As we're getting to the point we may have energy problems, it's kind of like a caveman freezing to death in a cave, bearing veins of coal, just because he didn't know he couldn't burn those rocks. Or some used to say, it's raining pea soup up there. We just got to get up there and scoop it up. And literally the power, but the problem is you have to have infrastructure up there to make use of all that. So the energy of activation is the systems, the infrastructure to get you there and to operate there and to use those resources in situ. Well, see, it's going to the moon and then to Mars and other places gets us there. Jeff Bezos, with his concept for asteroid mining, is a real key principal element. His vision he has when he unveiled his lunar lander, he showed habitats similar to that. Really nice, beautiful video that he showed. So the dreams are there. They're possible. And this is the first step. Now we're on our way. And that's what I have to say. And that's why I'm very, very, very happy today. Now we live in a day with a lot of bad stuff going on in this country. Division, strife. We need to make peace with each other, to realize that we're all the same inside, to overcome our differences, and to have something common to look forward to look up to, a bright, hopeful future that could serve all of us. And we need to make sure it can indeed serve all of us. Everybody needs to have full access to the same rights, the same foundation. Those as enumerated, I don't say granted, enumerated by the Constitution of the United States. Freedom to go places, do things, to aspire, to do things. So this is what we can do. We can work together. We can work together toward the great goal of humanity in space, of greening the cosmos, of having wonderful worlds. And I did a video on the habitat, the Mars habitat. That habitat can be scaled to Earth. And people living in habitats like that can live at a standard of living is good, if not better, than we're living at today with nature all around, so you'll be psychologically better off, self-sufficient, mostly using the resources from the ground where you build your home and growing your own food and making a living out of your own home. Yeah, and not really requiring much in the way of transportation, almost nothing other than the internet for services back and forth. And Elon's probably got that covered. So the kind of infrastructure we've acquired in modern society, we wouldn't need anything close to that. Even at the peak population projected by the UN, you could accommodate all the world's people in. I know we'd never put all the world's people in one place, but if you did, it'd be like half of Alaska, or Texas and New Mexico put together, half of Alaska. So think about that. We could dramatically change our world, how we live, how we make a living, we can have prosperity, and we can have a beautiful future. But we got to get over all these little petty things that's got us divided, and those that divide us. That's wrong. We should not be divided. Whether you're black, white, Chinese, uh, whatever you might be, green. My buddy Green Greg's, he's green. he acts like an earthling, but he's an alien. He's green. Anyway, if you know what I'm talking about, at my channel, Green Greg's. So we do have a bright future if we work toward it, if we work together. And I pray that we can see ourselves through the strife we're dealing with right now. We've got to be able to accommodate the feelings of other people, no matter what color they are, because inside we're all the same. We all nod our head for yes, shake our head for no. We all smile, we all laugh, we all cry, and we all have the same kind of heart deep inside. And that's the truth. We all have souls. There's no real difference. We all bleed red. So, and that's something we need to limit. And we need to make sure that people that are dividing us aren't doing that, and that somehow we come back to a state of a more peaceful society. All right, I'm off topic with that, but the whole topic is that we can have something to inspire us, something else to look forward to. In 1968, our country was highly divided. It was ugly, very ugly. We were thinking of that there would be some bad situations here, even worse than what we might be at now. Country was on the precipice of a really dark time. But the year ended with 3 men flying around the moon in Apollo 8. And that was a sweet note at the end of the year, and somehow things just changed after that year. We had something to look forward to. But you know what? We have better visions, bigger visions, and now we've had the first step toward it. That's what I have to say. We're now on our way to doing something of great value. So watch my videos on the habitat and other things. And I thank everyone for watching.